Buenos dias. So good to be back here. Have you ever heard the saying that somebody travels to a country for a week and writes a book about it? Another person goes for a month and publishes an article. But the person who stays a lifetime realizes they don't know enough to write anything? That's exactly how I was feeling preparing for this last home assignment after 43 years in Chile with EPES. How can I possibly summarize our work, share what I've learned, and do justice to the amazing people I've worked with over all these years? I was getting so desperate about a month ago sitting around the EPES table at lunch in Santiago that I said to the staff, what's the one most important message about our work that we could share with the congregations that have been loving us and supporting us for so long? Without even looking up, Hector, our wonderful administrator, said, to understand that our work is all about creating spaces for people who have been denied dignity in society. It's about building community with others so people aren't alone. And it's about working collectively to make positive changes in people's lives. Wow, thank you, Hector. And that's my main message today. For the past 43 years, through the repressive military dictatorship, earthquakes, tsunamis, devastating fires, and pandemics, EPES has remained steadfast in our commitment to stand with the poor and marginalized to build healthier communities. And you have been with us all the way. We wouldn't be where we are today without your love and support. As our world becomes more and more polarized, I often see a poster on Facebook that I like. When you have more than you need, build a longer table, not a higher wall. I think that image of an ever-expanding table is a good metaphor for EPES. People often describe EPES as a place where everybody belongs, where there's room for everyone, especially those whose dignity has been denied by the larger society. And we know God is not in the business of building higher walls that separate and divide. God wants to gather us in, give room for everybody, a place at life's table, and a chance to live in God's abundance forever. I think that's the central message of Jesus' ministry. This morning, I'd like to give you a brief history of EPES, and then invite you to review with me some of the highlights of these past 4 decades. I promise it won't take more than a few hours. Finally, I'd like to share a few short stories about some amazing women. So let me give you some background about EPES. 43 years ago, after working with a Lutheran ministry in New York City with Chilean refugees, I felt called to move to Chile. A year later, in 1982, in the midst of the military regime of Augusto Pinochet, along with 2 Chilean health workers, Rosario Castillo y Maria Eugenia Calvin, and a Canadian physician, Christina Mills, we founded EPES, a health education project of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Chile. The name EPES, Educación Popular en Salud, stands for Popular Education in Health. Our goal was to use participatory methods to educate, empower, and mobilize for better health in poor communities where the Lutheran Church had daycare centers. Our core strategy is a program to train and accompany community health workers called health promoters. Groups of 10 to 15 women gain practical knowledge and skills about common health issues. And just as important, they gain leadership training and experience. We never expected that some of these health teams would end up working together for over 30 years. Children of the health promoters have grown up watching their mothers gain confidence in their own skills, identify local health needs, and join and mobilize with others for change. Some of the health promoters ended up finishing high school, and several went on to college and moved into professions benefiting their communities. The first EPES health groups have also surprised us with the impact they've had on their children. The health promoters often tell us, our children are totally different because they grew up in the EPES family. Today, many of these children of the first generation of health promoters back in the 1980s have gone to college, becoming psychologists, social workers, occupational therapists, lawyers, teachers, and musicians. Just a month ago, Monica came bursting into the office, "My daughter passed the bar exam." She had taken it 2 times, it was her last time, and she finally passed the bar. These young people often take jobs serving the communities they grew up in, and not infrequently become health promoters in their own right. So now I invite you to look in your bulletin for this handout. And I want to share with you some of the highlights of our work over the last 40 years. So the first panel at the top you see in the black and white photo, that's the original team I mentioned. Then next to it is the 4 of us again 2 years ago at our 40th anniversary. Along the top is our whole staff during our 40th anniversary. And then there's a mural painting that's the mural outside of the EPES office in Santiago that says, "Otro mundo es posible," another world is possible. And because this is my last visit, I wanted to get a little more in depth about the work we do. A friend of mine came to visit Chile in March, and he and his wife had gone to Patagonia and done a lot of traveling, and they spent the last 2 days with me. And after being in the communities we work in, visiting with health promoting, visiting the community gardens, looking at the murals and talking to the EPES staff, my friend Al from grade school said, "Wow, Karen, I used to always just say when people said, 'What is Karen doing?' Oh, she's a missionary down there in Chile." He said, "Now you've made it much harder. I finally understand the scope and depth of your work." And so now I invite you to review some of the highlights of these 40 years so that hopefully I can share some of the scope and depth of our work. So beginning in the 1980s, if you move to the next panel down, the 1980s in Chile were a time of great fear, repression, and poverty, but also of great courage as Chileans fought to defend human rights and return to democracy. That's the context in which we sought to create spaces for shantytown women to discover and develop their talents and skills. We started the Community Health Promoter Training Program, which I mentioned earlier. At a time when people were afraid to meet, our training courses offered a space for women to gather to learn in a safe and loving environment. If you go to the next panel, in the 1990s, EPES responded to the HIV/AIDS pandemic in Chile. We helped organize the first national ecumenical gathering for churches, and we founded and led the National AIDS Action Network. It was a time of incredible discrimination against people living with HIV, and EPES founded an organization called Positivamente Positiva, Positively Positive, an organization for people living with HIV to come together for love and support. Also in the 1990s, you'll see we added environmental protection to our health promotion work, helping communities in Concepcion protect themselves from the pollution from the petrochemical plants. We coordinated campaigns along the Biobío River to improve life, and we helped recover and protect the wetlands. Now, if you turn it over to the 2000s, we created services for women victims of gender-based violence. And our work expanded internationally when the Lutheran Church in Argentina invited us to go there to train community health workers. The World Council of Churches in Geneva recognized our potential for international work and invited us to be a part of the editorial board of their health magazine, Contact. And we ended up producing it and distributing it for churches throughout the region. All of these experiences helped lead us to create, in 2010, our International Training School, a 10-day in-person program of hands-on exploration of EPES methodologies. To date, we've had 245 participants from 29 countries, including 9 African countries. You'll see all the countries on the little map there. Among the public health workers, activists, community leaders, we've welcomed pastors and church leaders from 18 Lutheran churches in the region to come to learn about methodologies to work with marginalized communities. And through our international school, we supported the founding and training of the Hope Foundation for African Women, led by Dr. Grace Mose and her team in Kenya. Grace was a graduate of our very first international school. Also in the 2010s, after an 8.8 earthquake hit southern Chile, I don't know if you remember that earthquake, it shifted the world's axis, and the epicenter was very close to our center in southern Chile. So we developed a long-term response to the health emergencies following natural disasters. And we put this to use, helping communities rebuild after devastating fires in Valparaiso. And EPES staff members were invited to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria to train people there. EPES made a tremendous national impact in Chile when in the 2010s we created Tobacco-Free Chile and conducted a 5-year advocacy campaign that was key in convincing the government to ban indoor smoking and all tobacco advertising. It was perhaps our biggest impact in terms of health. Somebody from MIT, a researcher from MIT, came 1 year later to study the impact of the change in the law, and heart conditions or heart attacks had fallen by 8%. So in the early 2020s, during the COVID lockdown, EPES started online training programs, teaching people how to make bread. We led self-care programs and taught how to plant family gardens. In Chile, we were very locked down. You could go out 2 times a week for 2 hours, and you had to get a police pass to do it. So in the poor communities we work in, people were very isolated. And the young people on our staff who are great at technology helped all the health promoters get up into connect through their phones so that we could provide workshops. And we delivered soil and seedlings to scores of health promoters so they could plant vegetable gardens in their homes during the pandemic. And now, after the pandemic, with the technical assistance of EPES, the health promoters are developing flourishing community gardens throughout Santiago. One of the enormous changes in Chile in the last 40 years is the influx of migrants from other Latin American countries, and in particular from Haiti. In response, EPES has turned our attention to Haitian women who face racism and the isolation of the language barriers. Once again, our past experiences training health promoters back in the 80s have served as a guide to creating spaces that generate community and promote skill building for Haitian women. Any Friday, you can stop by our office in Santiago and find 30 Haitian women studying Spanish, and their children are being cared for by professional healthcare or child care workers on the first floor so that they can relax and really have a space to learn. As I look back over these years, I'm grateful for what we've been able to achieve with your support. And yet what stands out the most to me and remains in my heart are the testimonies and examples of the many women we've worked with. Women who face discrimination because of poverty often tell us they felt like nobodies until EPES programs provided a space for them to be seen and their talents recognized. We have watched them grow together as they discover their own capacity to make change in their lives, in their families, and in their neighborhoods. So let me share 3 short stories about 3 remarkable women. Ellie, a health promoter from the 1990s, went with Sonia from our staff to the World AIDS Congress at the end of the 1990s. We always try to open opportunities for health promoters to learn and to share their experiences. Ellie went to the Congress with a poster presentation, an official presentation, and she was there during the hours that she was supposed to be presenting, and people stopped by and talked to her and were interested in the work that her community health team was doing, teaching women in communities in Chile about HIV/AIDS. And she kept saying to Sonia, "But I'm only a shantytown woman, but I'm only a shantytown woman." On the flight back to Santiago, she was very quiet, and then she turned to Sonia and said, "I realized something so important on this trip. I realized I can work with my brain, not just with my hands cleaning other people's homes." So when she got back to Chile, EPES encouraged her to apply for a job at the government's aid hotline. And you know what? Ellie's the longest standing employee of the Ministry of Health of Chile's AIDS hotline. If you call it today, she'll be the person answering your questions about medications, treatments, and any new information. She often says, "EPES opened a door that I could finally believe in myself." Lorena Zambrano, a young woman in her 20s, and her 2 children had barely slept since boarding a bus in Ecuador on their way 2,000 miles to Chile. Life had become unbearable for Lorena and her children in Ecuador, and she decided to join her mother, who was already in northern Chile. After facing arbitrary immigration policy at the border, Lorena and her children were finally allowed to enter. 18 years later, Lorena has become a passionate immigrant rights advocate and coordinator of an organization based in the northern city of Iquique, where thousands of immigrants continue to pour in. With the help of ELCA emergency funds, EPIS has been partnering with Lorena and the amazing group of women who accompany and support hundreds of immigrant families as they journey in search of a better, safer life. This past January, a group of friends sponsored a scholarship so that Lorena could come to our international training program. And afterwards, Lorena told me, "This has been transformative. I now have the tools to build a stronger organization to support immigrants, because I don't want anybody to go through what I went through." We met Kimberly in 2010. She was 23 years old, expecting her first child and living in a tent because she, like all her neighbors, had lost their homes during the earthquake and tsunami. EPIS started working with families living in tents immediately after the earthquake. After 3 months of being in tents, the families were moved to an empty plot of land where they installed precarious constructions, very flimsy roofs that were constantly flying off so much that they wrote their names on the roof so they could find them. EPIS helped fix the homes, and then we started providing community health promoter training to the women in the community. Kimberly, although she was the youngest woman there, she started to discover her leadership skills. They lived for 4 years in the emergency camp until they were finally moved into permanent homes. Kimberly always says, "The earthquake was the worst thing that happened to us, and EPIS was the best." She has continued her leadership role in the health and environmental committee in her community and decided to study social work. Right now, she's doing her social work internship at EPIS in southern Chile. Finally, there are other people whose story I'd like to tell. All of you, the many people in congregations who so lovingly have supported me in our work over all these years. I get very emotional thinking about members of Lutheran congregations who have come to Chile with delegations to support us after the earthquake, to help rebuild, to help build our center in Concepcion, and to just join us in celebrating the work. We're thankful for all the cards and letters we've received over the years and the generous donations to support our work. And we feel empowered knowing that we're part of a global Christian community and that every Sunday morning people are being remembered and prayed for. We and I could never have done this work without your accompaniment. It's only because of you and your consistency and support that these stories have been able to emerge. So I hope you'll continue standing alongside Ellie, Lorena, and Kimberly, and others whose dignity is often denied, whether those people live in your own community or far away in Chile or elsewhere. And I hope you'll continue to support ministries that courageously stand for justice in the midst of uncertainty and repression, and work to build longer tables that welcome instead of higher walls. Jesus said, "I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." Recognizing the brokenness of our world, Christ calls the church to share in his ministry of healing and wholeness. The church's mission in health to life in abundance challenges us to work towards a world in which everyone belongs, where everyone has a place at the table. I thank you for all your support. And as we move into the next chapter of EPIS ministry, I hope you'll continue to be a welcoming congregation as you have welcomed me. And as I and some of the older members of our staff retire, I hope you'll continue supporting the new leadership as they carry EPIS mission into the future. I should mention that 2 of our young leaders are second-generation EPIS. One grew up as the daughter of one of the founding members of EPIS, and one grew up as the daughter of a health promoter. They are amazingly talented and committed young women. And I hope you'll continue supporting the global mission of the ELCA. In a world that is ever more complex and unequal, a world in which so many Ellies, Lorenas, and Kimberlys are waiting for an opportunity to develop their talents and skills and serve their communities, the ELCA walks with people and ministries around the globe. It's been the privilege of my life to have taken this path. I thank you for walking with me and the EPIS community as we continue to build longer tables where everyone is welcome. I wish you the best in your lives and your work. Que Dios te bendiga. God bless you. I had a tissue.